Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. And I have on the line Miss Daisy Luther, and she is the organic prepper. How you doing, Miss Daisy?
I'm doing real well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. And I also have on the line my trusted co-host, Mr. Mark S. Mann. You probably know his work from SGT Report. How you doing, Mark?
Hey, Roy. Good to be with you again.
Well, thank you. Miss Daisy, if you would introduce yourself and your website.
Well, hi. My website is the Organic Prepper, and we talk a lot about getting prepared in a healthy fashion for whatever happens to come along. Not always huge gloom and doom, life-ending catastrophes, but things that might just affect one family, like a job loss, or just short-term crises like a bad storm where you're out of power for a week. So just general preparedness.
So more realistic, more something that's down to that most people can wrap their brain around.
Yeah, we try to be pretty down to earth.
Yes, that's what I really like about the work that you do is that you bring in the everyday to preparedness because I personally believe that's going to do more to help people to understand the importance of having communication. Because if you look at just situations like Katrina, Sandy Superstorm, or the swarm of tornadoes that were in Alabama and Missouri, there were very few deaths in any of those situations. But there were a whole lot of people that were very unprepared, were at the mercy of people that they probably didn't want to be at the mercy of, like the government.
Well,
So,
that's exactly right. And a lot of times it's not about a life and death situation. It's about your comfort. It's about your kids feeling safe and secure, as
exactly.
opposed to I'm going to die if I don't have 500 pounds of beans in my pantry. It can be something way smaller. Do you have to ration out a 12 pack of water to last your family for a week? So it's more about keeping people comfortable and just keeping your day-to-day life running no matter what seems to happen. And you also don't want to have to bend your knee and bow to tyranny for an MRE and a bottle of water because you have absolutely nothing in your house. And that's what we saw a lot of when Sandy hit New York City. Because there, people buy groceries one day at a time. It's just what you do. I lived there when I was in my early 20s, and you just stop by the store every day on your way home from work and you grab dinner. You don't have anything put back. So those people were in big trouble when the normal services were no longer working.
Well, Mark, you're up in the Northeast. What was your experience?
Yeah, Daisy, I'm with you. I was there in my early 20s. I live in the People's Republic of Connecticut right now, but I spent
Ah,
a long time there. And, first I want to say thanks for the work that you do, and more specifically for the type of work that you do, because, I think you really do keep things practical. And I think that that's what a lot of people need to realize when it comes to preparedness. You said something really important to me about being comfortable. And a lot of times when I've written things, I've always said you can endure a lot more. You and your family can endure a lot more when you're comfortable. The more uncomfortable you are, the more situations hurt. The more uncomfortable you are, the less tolerance you have. You need to be mentally clear when you're in a crisis situation, and the more comfortable you are, I think the more the better you off you will be at dealing with all the things that are happening. So I agree with you 100%.
well, a really good analogy that works with that. Have you ever been on a diet? You're trying to lose 10 pounds, let's say. And suddenly you take your calories from 3,000 calories a day to 1,000 calories a day. You are miserable. You want to rip people's throats out because they have a cheeseburger and you don't. And you don't want to feel like that when there's a disaster going on.
Right.
It's that same comfort level. You want to be able to maintain the food that you eat, the water that you drink, so that you can focus on the more important things like securing your house if you've got broken windows and that type of thing. So you want to take care of those little details and just keep life running smoothly. And it's also way better if you happen to have a family and you have small children. These situations can be terrifying for a small child.
Yes.
Before I really got into preparedness, we lived in Canada, and there was a really terrible storm. Tornadoes are very rare there, but we had a tornado that hit our town. Our windows in our house imploded because it hit so suddenly. I didn't have time to crack the windows or anything like that. And my kids were terrified. And we had a couple of days of food in our house, but we didn't have enough that, we could last the 2 weeks that it took to get our power back on. And that's really what triggered me to get better prepared, because had I had the things in place, I could have boarded up my windows. I could have made the kids something to eat that they were comfortable with and familiar with. And then none of the rest of it would have seemed quite as bad.
What my wife and I did, and we're in Tennessee, and when the swarm of tornadoes blew through Alabama, we sent, by way of one of the churches, a bunch of chocolate, lipstick, makeup, and water, of course. A few of the necessities, but what we focused on were things that made people human.
That's right. That's right.
And it felt really good. I mean, we weren't able to physically go, but we were able to send the items that we felt would, once again, make people feel human again. And I personally believe that should be at the top of the reasons to prepare, is our spiritual well-being, not just the fact that I've got 500 pounds of beans. What am I going to do to remember that I am human in this situation?
Yes, we keep a good supply. We've also had an experience. My youngest daughter and I spent a year in northern Ontario, so really, really cold up there. And our cabin was heated only by wood, and we lost power all the time in the winter because of storms. So we would be out of power for a week, and then we'd have it for a couple of days, and then we'd be out for a week. And initially, it was a little bit, it took a little getting used to, but then we had a really nice supply of things that we could do to entertain ourselves when there was no power. You can't watch a movie. You can't listen to music in your normal way of listening to music. Like, we use Pandora quite often for music, so via the internet. And we had a nice little stockpile that was easy to get to of different activities. And, it got to the point that my daughter, who was 11 at the time that we lived there, would get really happy every time the power would go out, because that meant we were hanging out and we were doing other stuff than our normal day-to-day activities. And, when you can transition your readiness into something like that, where the kids are like, awesome, it's an adventure, that's just definitely a much better way to handle a crisis.
It's a big plus.
Absolutely.
Because instead of them being all freaked out and running around and, making the situation worse. Exactly. Being in an unfamiliar environment, in your own home. I mean, your home becomes an unfamiliar place. Instead of it being that, it becomes, like you said, an adventure.
Exactly.
I was wondering if Daisy would comment on something for me. A lot of the stuff that she does is very practical. And what I've found over the years in terms of preparedness is that it becomes a mindset issue for the people who really understand preparedness. But for a lot of people, what I see is that preparedness ends up being something where, people feel that they have to go out and buy a bunch of stuff. And because they went out and bought a bunch of stuff, that they're protected, or that they don't need to worry about things anymore. And when it comes down to the simple stuff, like making sure you have a pair of good walking shoes, or making sure that you have the right clothing in your day-to-day commute for work, or simple things, people kind of really overlook the simple stuff and focus more on the zombie apocalypse type stuff. Would you comment on that for me, Daisy?
Well, I think that happens a lot. And I think that kind of playing little scenarios in your mind of what could possibly go wrong can be really helpful in your day-to-day preparedness. So if you have a daily commute and it takes you 30 minutes to drive your car to work, you need to think about, how would I get home if my car's not running? If the roads are blocked, like that they recently had in Atlanta with the big snowstorm. I was really surprised when I read that, because some people were 5 or 6 miles from home, but they spent the night in their car because they couldn't get home. And, if you're in reasonably good health, obviously, if you're in poor health, then, it's a different ballgame. But if you're in reasonably good health, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able, in a low level situation like that, you shouldn't be able to put your other boots on, put a little bit of winter gear on, and walk yourself home. You should have enough in your vehicle to get you through a few hours. I also read, there was a lady that had her children with her in the vehicle, and they had no food and no water in their vehicle. They just didn't store that. So, within an hour, her kids were really uncomfortable and crying and cold and miserable. And, these things that you do every day, there are things that can go wrong, and you need to think these things through. And it doesn't have to mean that you're worrying about them. You can almost make it like a game. You just plan, how would I get home if my car stopped right here and nothing was running and I had no chance of rescue? How would I get home to my kids? So just playing through little scenarios in your mind, I think, is the best way to prevent those day-to-day minor issues from becoming huge catastrophes.
And along those same lines, Daisy, with the very real possibility of an economic mishap here in the United States, what kind of currency bankroll should a person have as emergency currency? Only U.S. dollars, gold, silver, foreign currency? I mean, is there...
I like a mixture. Of things. I like to have tangible goods, of course, food and water and tools and things like that. I like to keep American money on hand, because you may need some. While the system is still running somewhat, you trade U.S. dollars for your goods and services. You trade an ounce of gold for goods and services at this point. So I like to have a bit of cash. Something that would be by for a month, I would say, is the amount of cash that I like to keep on hand. I also keep a little bit of Canadian currency because my oldest daughter is in university up in Canada. So I keep a little bit of Canadian currency in case we have to make a trip. And then, aside from that, I don't use banks as savings accounts. I'm a big fan of silver because I'm not rich enough to have a whole lot of gold. But I think precious metals are definitely the way to go. Once you have gotten the tangible goods that you need to survive for a period of time, I think your next step has to be your I'm just going to say in quotes, savings account. And I think precious metals are the best way to do that.
I like what you said as far as having a month's worth of emergency currency, in a combination of precious metals and cash. Because I think that people overlook cash. And for me and my wife, our thought is, smaller bills like ones and fives and tens and
Yes.
and 20s. Because if you've got, a month's worth of currency and it's all in $100 bills, you may be stuck with them.
Yeah, and people aren't going to be able to change that. And
Exactly.
if you had to go buy something small, like, a box of nails to repair something, let's just say you didn't have those on hand, if someone can't break your $100 bill, you're going to pay $100 for your box of nails.
Exactly.
Because you need nails more than you need the dollars, and that'd just be pretty silly.
Yes.
So we were talking about this, Daisy, before the call started, and we believe that even though having metals is very important to protect your wealth and savings, that there may be a window where cash really is king, because it's going to be a while before, if there is some type of economic meltdown, you're not going to be able to just roll down to your local gas station and pay for a tank of gas with Silver Eagles, not unless you want to pay for them at the face value, right?
Right. Did you happen to see the video that Mark Dice did a little while back? He stood outside of a coin shop and he offered to sell, I think it was an ounce of gold for like a ridiculous amount of money, like $5, $20, something like that, like US dollars.
Yes.
And no one would take him up on it because no one had a clue what that gold was worth.
Exactly.
Right.
I remember that.
That is exactly the kind of thing, if our dollar began to collapse, that's initially the kind of mindset that you would face. And, I've always felt a slight twinge of guilt for the fact that, if there was an initial collapse, I would absolutely take my dollars and I would go to the store and I would buy what I could buy because, it's still there and they're still taking these dollars. And I always feel this little twinge of guilt because at that point, I would know these dollars aren't really going to be worth anything. But on the same venue, they aren't really going to be too keen on taking a gold coin for those groceries in my cart. So, there's going to be that little window, just like you said, where people just don't understand what's going on.
See, and I think that window is not going to be so little. I think it's going to be probably several months, if not more. I mean, I really don't see it being a very short period of time between, if there is some type of, national currency crisis, between the absolute beginning and the transition period. I think that transition period is going to be a while. And I think that it'll be a little while, that it'll take, at least several weeks before people are actually educated to precious metals and their value.
And during that period of time, more than likely, you're still going to have to pay your mortgage and pay your taxes and do things like that. I mean, there's going to be a period of time where you still have to make those payments in order to keep your property.
Right.
And you might as well use your dollars for that.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, I think we all have to remember that a very small percentage of the global population holds physical precious metals. So it's something like 2% or less. So when we think about how much coinage would actually be available for circulation, there's not a lot there. So we could be in a situation where cash and coin end up becoming very scarce, like they were in the Great Depression.
Definitely.
I agree.
I think we'll see a big resurgence of the barter system.
I agree with that, 100%.
Yeah, I think that would be definitely a big part of the transition period. But after a while, just like every other time in history when barter was used, there comes a point where the field has to become level, and barter doesn't satisfy that.
Well, people need a way to store their extra wealth and labor, and eventually people are going to be getting only the things that they need to survive. But eventually, like you said, there will come a time when there will be a surplus, and that's a good way to store that surplus of wealth and labor.
Couldn't agree more. And I would like to thank everybody for their time today. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and giving us a listen. And Daisy, is there anything that you would like to, any words of wisdom that you would like to leave us with?
Just basically that getting yourself prepared is an optimistic thing to do. It means that no matter what comes along, you know that you and your family are going to be okay, and that your intention is not just to get through a small crisis, but to thrive in the long term. To
thrive. That's it. That's what we want to do. Well, Mark, I certainly appreciate you being on the call as well. And
thank you.
Appreciate your input. And Daisy, tell people where they can find your work.
My website is theorganicprepper.ca.
And I certainly appreciate it. And if you all just check out Miss Daisy's work, I'm sure she would appreciate it because she has a lot of good things to share with you. Daisy, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, have a good afternoon. Bye-bye. Well, thank you all for sticking around, and we're going to transition into the second half of our show, which is going to focus primarily on firearms. and we're going to take a look at each week. Mark and I are going to get into the firearms aspect of our lives. That's going to include items like what's happening with the gun grabbers, what's happening with the victories in the states like Georgia this week. We're also going to look at ammunition supplies, how those are ups and downs, and what's happening. You know, there was a rumor that Russia was going to stop exporting ammunition to the United States. We're going to look at those items. We're going to do that every week. And we're going to get into items like training. We're going to look at items like firearms as investments, lead as an investment, because the price of ammunition is not going down. Guns, the price of guns or firearms in general, they're not going down.
One thing that we're going to do, folks, is that we're going to try to provide some really good information in the form of solutions. Rory made an interesting comment, which was, we want to deal in reality. And our intention here is not to make Navy SEALs out of people, but we realize that a lot of people are tuning in because they don't have a knowledge base or a subject matter expert in this field, and they're hungry for the information. We want to keep it practical. We want to offer really practical solutions to a lot of the problems that are out there. A lot of us know what the problems are, but a lot of people always say, okay, I know this, I've heard this before, what am I going to do about it? And that's one of the things that we want to try and help people figure out.
So this week, what we're going to do is we want to look at an article that was posted over at the Daily Sheeple. It was written by Lily Dane. It's titled, Historic Gun Rights Bill Expected to be Signed into Law in Georgia. It's being touted as the Guns Everywhere law, and it's actually a great victory for freedom lovers and people that believe that the Second Amendment is a right endowed upon us by our Creator. And Mark, if you would, just share your thoughts on what's happening in the state of Georgia, please.
What I want to really start off by saying is that over the last year or so, we've seen a lot of states enact draconian anti-Second Amendment, anti-firearm freedom legislation. Those states being Connecticut, New York, Colorado, California, Maryland. A lot of these states have really kind of clamped down on gun rights. And what that was all based on was a reaction to a lot of the mass shootings that have taken place, Sandy Hook. We don't have to revisit them all. But the bottom line is those events were used to push all these agendas. And the powers that be really kind of, it backfired on them, for lack of a better term, because where a lot of states started doing this stuff, other states said, hey, we understand where you're going with this, and that's not going to happen. We're not going to do that. Our constituents don't want that. We don't want that. And we realize that all of these laws that are passed on the citizenry of the state have nothing to do with crime control or stopping violent random acts. It's basically taking it out on people and making criminals out of people that otherwise were not. Okay? So in Georgia, we actually see the opposite of what's been happening, where they are expanding the allowable areas where firearms can be carried. They're allowing them to be carried into schools, into places of business, into restaurants and bars, places that serve alcohol.
And church.
Churches, okay? Places where they would have otherwise been non-permissive environments to carry weapons into. And while I think that's a very good thing, I want to start out by saying that I'm not a fan of having people carrying guns into bars. If somebody's going to be carrying a gun into a restaurant where they serve alcohol, I don't have a problem with that as much as I do somebody carrying a firearm into a drinking establishment where, you know, there's people going there to get all lit up. I'm not the type of person that thinks that guns and alcohol mix. But I think the other thing that people have to realize too is that, you know, this can also be a double-edged sword. When you see widening of the parameters in which people can carry weapons into, that can also backfire against us, where, people who are carrying guns provide a mountain of data of why they should not be allowed to be carried into certain places. So it's good and bad. And where did we see that? We saw that in Florida with the hold your ground and the no retreat law, where, within the first week of that law going into effect, there were something like a dozen shootings throughout the state, and 2 or 3 of them were questionable at best. So where this can be a great thing for gun owners, it could also kind of muddy the waters a little bit too. So, there's an extreme to each side, and you don't want to be in a position where you're dealing in extremes when it comes to firearms. So I think that the Georgia thing is very positive, but I also see some problems there, and hopefully people of Georgia are going to be smart enough not to create any data which may be used against them in the future at some point.
Well, I'm going to have to take exception to some of what you said, Mark, because I look at history and I see in history when people carried weapons, when everyone was armed, you had a lot less crime. And that includes going into drinking establishments. If criminals know the person that they are intending on doing harm to is probably armed, they're a lot less likely to create a situation. Now, and specifically in a drinking establishment, a bar, a place that is specifically for this serving of alcohol, that can be a very volatile environment. That's why the person behind the bar that's running the establishment should be in charge.
Oh, I agree.
And that person, I'm not saying that they have to be, I'm not saying that that person should be held responsible for the actions of others, but I'm saying that what used to happen is that you would have a doorman, and that doorman would check weapons, right?
Yep, I agree.
There you go. So, so there's part of the solution. You go into a nightclub today, they got a doorman. What's he there for? Who knows? But
right.
that position was established specifically for checking firearms or weapons of all types. So that's the exception that I have to take with some of what you were saying. I agree wholeheartedly with most of what you were saying, but I think that if more people are armed, there will be less crime.
I agree.
Well, what they're doing down in Georgia is that what's on the table is the removal of fingerprinting for renewal of weapons carry licenses, prohibit the state from creating and maintaining a database of weapons carry license holders, create an absolute defense for the legal use of deadly force in the face of a violent attack, lower the age to obtain a concealed carry license for self-defense from 21 to 18 for active duty military, with specific training, allows for the use of firearm sound suppressors while hunting, repeal the unnecessary and duplicative state-required license for firearms dealers instead of requiring only a federal firearms license, why would you need a state license and a federal license?
Well, Rory, with that same logic, why would you need to get re-fingerprinted every time you renew your carry permit? Your fingerprints don't change, right?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, what they're doing is they're acknowledging the fact that the state is generating revenue at the cost of a gun owner or a firearms dealer. Basically saying that, hey, every time you want to renew your permit, we're going to smash you over the head for $20 or $30 to fingerprint you, even though there's no reason for doing that because your fingerprints didn't change over the last 5 years. So, they're being more responsible. They're limiting the size of government and the role of government in their practices and procedures for licensing individuals in the state. And I think that's important because what that is the acknowledgement by government that, hey, we're being a little abusive in some of our licensing and some of our fee-based services for you to be able to have this right. And I think that's important because that sets a precedent. And it's very responsible. And I think that if you're a constituent and you see somebody voting in favor of that, to me, that would be the sign of somebody that I would want to support. Not everybody's going to agree with that stuff, but, it's also a culture issue. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that. They say, why is it that the northeastern states and the West Coast states, they're always so anti-gun? A lot of that has to do with culture. As much as people want to downplay that, you have a lot of people in Georgia that do hunt and shoot recreationally, where in some of the states that we're talking about, you'd be hard-pressed to find a public range, just to go recreationally target shoot. So there's a lot of cultural differences at play there as well, even though, we like to all think that we're the same and that, all the 50 states are the same and everybody's all American. It's really, unless you get out there and travel and you're part of that culture and you see all the different things, a lot of people really discount that. And I think
Exactly.
that's something that not a lot of people always understand.
Well, and I think that it also goes back to the self-censorship, and you are more than welcome to exercise all of your rights guaranteed to you under the Constitution, as long as I agree with them.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as I approve that you are able to do that, and I think that that's the vast majority as far as cultural differences. Yeah, I agree. We in the South, we do hunt, we do target practice, we do. I mean, as a child, I remember. I mean, that was one of the birthday presents that I wanted was a 410 single shot shotgun, and my father was happy to oblige because I did a lot of I did a lot of hunting. I mean, I was 13, 14 years old, and we were constantly going hunting. So, I mean, I've been a responsible gun owner for a long time and a law-abiding citizen for a long time as well. So, I don't want anybody coming in and telling me how I'm going to live. And I think that Georgia is on the right path as far as trying to limit, like you were saying, Mark, limit the size of government, limit what infringements upon people's rights they're going to enact. And I think that they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. And for the sake of time here, what I want to do in closing is just make people understand that where you do see a lot of battles and hot spots starting to erupt, what people should take from this is that ultimately firearms ownership, firearms rights, the ability for you to own certain types of guns and magazines and where you're going to carry them or not. Ultimately, we see that I have said many times, this has come down to a states' rights issue. Barack Obama or any of the other clowns in Washington are not going to paint the whole country with the same brush and tell everyone how it's going to be. That is not going to happen. They can pass all the federal laws they want. They will not fly in states like Montana, Wyoming, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, add a few others in here and there. But the bottom line is people need to understand it's important to support places like the NRA. It's important to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in this fight. But if you're going to get involved, the most effective place where you can make a difference is where it matters most, which is in your home state. If you lose your home state, it doesn't really matter what the rules are somewhere else because it affects you right where you live more than anything.
Exactly.
So I think people really need to understand, ultimately, that's going to be a states' rights issue. And when you see things like happening in Georgia and the opposite of what's happening in places like Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, you can see that, history has proven me right when it comes to that. It's a states' rights issue. As much as people want to say it's a federal thing, we'll see about that. And we'll see which states say, okay, we're going to tolerate that or not. That will be a matter for the record that people are not going to be able to dispute one way or the other.
at the state level, here in Tennessee, we have the Tennessee Firearms Association, which is structured similar to the National Rifle Association, but it is specifically for Tennessee. And I would encourage people in their home state and to seek out your home state's Firearms Association organization and to support them, because I'll tell you right now, the Tennessee Firearms Association, they move mountains around here, and they do an unbelievable job of helping to protect my rights as a citizen and as a gun owner. They are doing fantastic work. So
absolutely,
please encourage
look at Illinois.
everyone.
Illinois is a perfect example of everything you're talking about. If it was not for the Illinois State Rifle Association and the tireless work of Richard Pearson and his staff, you would have draconian measures that would probably rival California or New York in the state of Illinois. You have a small group of people with support being extremely, extremely effective in a bastion of liberal, a liberal stronghold, basically. They've been able to undo all the nonsense that the people in Chicago wanted to implement, to the point where, they've thrown them out on the rear ends, and now they're going to be carrying handguns for the first time in the history of the state. They were the only holdout. So, that's a perfect example of what we're talking about, and how a small group of dedicated people with support can enact some real change that people like us would believe in. So with that, I want to thank everybody for listening, and we're going to try and do everything we can to bring reality-based, solution-based content for some of the problems that we talk about and deal with on a daily basis.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you saying that, Mark, because that's exactly what we're going to do. Each week, we are going to remain focused on solutions. We're going to not only discuss what's actually happening out there and affecting you and your daily life, but we're going to present solutions to some of the issues that we all face. With that, I appreciate everybody listening and tuning in. Please don't forget to subscribe and to comment and to share, and we will talk with you again soon. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe.